Good morning and welcome to our second set of presentations today. My name is David Wilcove. I am with the Woodrow Wilson School and the Program in Science, Technology, and Environmental Policy. It is my pleasure to moderate this session entitled Concerns for Oceans, Climate, and Animal Welfare. Before I introduce our panelists, I have been asked to tell you that the coffee being served today is fair trade and organic coffee. So if you have been holding back for fear of committing an environmental or ethical flaw, please go ahead and help yourself. As I said, our session today is entitled Concerns for Oceans, Climate, and Animal Welfare. Each of our three panelists will speak for approximately 20 minutes. They will judge that they're coming to the end of their time as I get increasingly fidgety. And then we will take questions from the audience until 12:30 when we will break for lunch. It's my pleasure to introduce the first panelist in this session, Dr. Rebecca Goldburg. Dr. Goldburg is a senior scientist at Environmental Defense, where she has focused her work on promoting sustainable harvest of fisheries, marine fisheries, as well as promotion of which fish species are in fact safe to eat. She focuses on scientific and policy issues concerning aquaculture as well, and she is a member of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's working group to develop organic standards for the growing aquaculture industry. She also serves on the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Advisory Board and the Marine Aquaculture Task Force. And I might also add, with no small amount of pride, that she is an alumna from the class of 1980 here at Princeton. Rebecca Goldburg.
Thank you very much, David. Can you hear me? It's wonderful to be here. And I thought I'd begin my presentation not with a title slide, but rather with a picture of a fish dinner. And the reasons of this are multiple. Not only am I going to focus my presentation today on fish, but this is my inspiration for getting involved. When I came to environmental defense, I worked on agricultural issues. But about a decade ago, as environmental defense was starting an oceans program with my involvement, I became aware that when I frequently went out to eat or shared meals with ecologically conscious colleagues and friends, that they would make good choices about the meat they eat or the produce they bought. But when it came to fish, they would select anything as an ecologically acceptable choice, and I knew that just wasn't true. Well, in the years since, there's been increasing attention in the public and the media to problems with fisheries. Certainly, the collapse of the cod fishery in New England and Atlantic Canada brought a lot of attention to the issues in the late 1990s. And this attention has continued. Certainly when cartoonists start writing about a problem, you know it's beginning to become mainstream. Well, what really is the status of the oceans? Well, if you look at United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization statistics, which are the available global statistics on fisheries, they show essentially that wild fish catches have plateaued around the world. Since about the mid-1980s, global fish catch has hovered at about 90 to 93 million metric tons a year. It goes up and down with various factors, but we don't see dramatic increases or declines. But that really doesn't tell the whole story. Those statistics are in many ways misleading. And let me explain why. And I'm going to start doing this by showing you a map of the North Atlantic. And this is a map made by fisheries scientists at the University of British Columbia. And it shows the so-called biomass, the weight, essentially, of what they call table fish, predatory fish like haddock and cod that people really like to eat at the turn of the century. And the red areas are the areas that have very high biomass, down through the light blue areas, which have virtually none. So you can see there were a fair amount of fish, big fish at the turn of the century for humans to consume. Well, this is the same map made by the same individuals for about the year 2000, and you can see just the extraordinary decline in table fish biomass, the fish we like to eat. And there's nothing really unique about this set of maps geographically. I could have shown you a similar set of maps for Asia, which would show the exact same pattern. It's going on all around the world. And what's really happening is something called fishing down the food chain, a term that was coined by the same group of scientists at the University of British Columbia. And what's happened is that, the pristine oceans have large numbers of big fish like tuna that people love to eat. And today we're probably somewhere like here where we fished out a lot of these big fish. There's some still left, but a lot of our fisheries left are lower on the food chain, smaller fish, and we're catching more of them. And that's why we can maintain fish catches at a global level when actually there's still dramatic declines or even collapses in many fisheries. And if we keep at it in the way we're going, eventually we're going to be down here where all the fish left are small fish in the ocean and invertebrates, things like jellyfish, which are just booming given the drastic changes in marine ecosystems we've seen. Well, why are we seeing these declines in the fish that people like to eat most? Well, one reason is, of course, overfishing, catching more fish than the oceans can replenish. And there are a number of reasons for overfishing. One of them is very simple. It's technology. At the turn of the century, fishing boats were largely powered by sails. After World War II, they became much bigger, powered by diesel engines. And that, coupled with sonar technology that allows fishing boats to target virtually any aggregation of fish in the oceans, has meant a really hugely increased capacity to catch fish. But overfishing isn't the complete story. There are also a number of ecological damages that are brought about by many types of fishing. To give a couple examples, the advent of big motorized diesel fishing boats has meant that the boats can pull large, what are called trawls, nets that are pulled over the bottom. They catch all the fish in their path, which is efficient, but they also do a lot of damage to the sea floor. It's sort of like clear-cutting the sea floor. You're catching everything in the path of that net, including things like deep water corals, all the structures on the bottom. Some people call it clear-cutting the oceans. Another collateral damage of fishing is from what's called bycatch. A lot of fish end up being caught and killed other than the species that are targeted. Shrimp fishery worldwide is particularly notorious for bycatch. The picture on your right is a picture of a typical catch on a shrimp vessel. You can see there's a lot of fish in there, and on average something like 5 pounds of juvenile fish and other marine life are killed for every pound of wild shrimp that's caught worldwide. Well, with the problems there are in fisheries, fish farming or aquaculture has become an increasingly important source of seafood. About 43% of all the fish directly consumed by people worldwide are now farmed. That's up from 9% in 1980. So the growth in fish farming around the world has been absolutely spectacular. It's important to note that this is a very diverse activity. There are over 200 aquatic species that are farmed worldwide. They're raised using a variety of production systems, everything from what are called net pens or cages and that are put directly in coastal waters, like you see here, to ponds, to tanks, and so on. And fish are raised both for sale in domestic markets in developing countries. Aquaculture is incredibly important for food security in Asia. But also there's been a lot of growth of aquaculture for sale in international markets. And this growth in aquaculture, coupled with the depletion of many of the fisheries in the industrialized countries, has led to an enormous increase in fish imports in the United States. We now get 80% of the seafood we eat in this country from abroad. It's an astounding figure. Well, let's look at how aquaculture and fish consumption has changed. Let's just go back a little over 10 years and look at the top 5 U.S. seafoods in 1994. You can see canned tuna is the most consumed seafood, followed by shrimp, pollock, which is used to make fish sticks. It's wild-caught fish, salmon, and cod. No real surprises there. 2004, a mere decade later, shrimp has moved to number 1, salmon is number 3, catfish is number 5, and I didn't include the 6th fish here, but it's tilapia. Those are all fish that are now predominantly coming from farms. So you can see how our food supply, our seafood supply, has been transformed by fish farming. You can also see that we are eating more fish than we used to. Well, how do we think about fish farming? And the fact is, it's not a simple thing to think about. Fish farming can be both a solution and a problem. If we're interested in increasing seafood supplies, which is important for many developing countries in particular, farming fish is the only reason to create that increase, because our oceans are finite, our supplies of fish are finite, and many stocks are in deep trouble. That said, some aquaculture sectors, including some that have really boomed in recent years, are ecologically quite problematic. To illustrate this, I'd like to talk just very briefly about salmon farming. If you go back very far in time, virtually all salmon came from the ocean, from stream beds. And now the majority of them are coming from feedlots. The blue in this chart is the total catch worldwide of wild salmon from 1950 through the early 2000s. And the area in purple is the production of farm salmon, and you can see that it has just skyrocketed again to more than half the global supply of salmon. What are some of the issues with salmon farming? Well, like any feedlot, when you put a lot of animals in one place, you produce a lot of wastes. And salmon farms are generally net pens or net cages like these, which are in British Columbia. And the waste from salmon farms flow directly into coastal waters. And if you have a small number of fish in a well-flushed area, it probably doesn't matter a lot, just like it's okay to have cows, on pasture. But when you start putting hundreds of thousands or millions of fish in one place, the amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus that go into the water can be quite substantial. A single good-sized salmon farm produces an amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that's roughly equivalent to the amount produced by the untreated sewage from tens of thousands of people. Another big issue with salmon farming has been the spread of parasites and diseases. In particular, again, back to British Columbia, where this is now a very hot issue. Salmon in farms in BC and elsewhere in the world seem to develop problems with what are called sea lice. You pack a lot of creatures in a small area and you get disease outbreaks. They're very nasty-looking creatures that live on the outside of fish and literally chew the surface of the fish. And there is increasing evidence that salmon farms are transferring sea lice from farm salmon to wild, juvenile, pink and chum salmon, and may be depressing populations of those wild fish, and that's extremely troubling. Finally, an issue that is critical in salmon farming and also in a lot of aquaculture sectors is what I term inefficiency. And what I mean by this is that a number of the fish that are raised, particularly for consumption in industrialized countries, are naturally predators. Those are the kind of fish many of us like to eat. And in order to grow these predators, they're fed diets that are high in fish meal and fish oil made from wild-caught fish. So it takes something like 3 pounds of wild-caught fish to grow a pound of farm salmon. So the upshot is that salmon farming isn't really an alternative to fishing. It's just another way of using marine resources and can actually contribute to problems with overexploitation of fisheries. So many people call this the aquaculture paradox, that aquaculture is an alternative but can also contribute to the collapse of fisheries around the world. Well, with this background, I thought I'd finish off my talk by speaking very briefly about some of the strategies the environmental community and my organization, Environmental Defense in particular, are pursuing to achieve some changes in fishing and fish farming to make it more ecologically sound. And our work involves government policies, creating incentives, and working in the marketplace. And again, working in the marketplace is really important because of the international nature of the seafood trade. We can't just rely on domestic policy as a tool for influencing fisheries. I want to talk very briefly about some of our work on fisheries. This is sort of the cliff notes to an idea called catch shares, and I hope I can make them comprehensible very briefly. But to give you a bit of background, one of the reasons we have problems with overfishing is that current systems of fisheries management actually encourage fishermen to catch all the fish they can. Fishermen act in their economic self-interest. They're not bad people, but they have mortgages to pay and so on, and they're often not making a lot of money. And the way current fisheries management is done is typically to mandate inefficiencies. For example, that fishermen can only use certain gear to catch fish or only fish at very limited times of year so that they don't catch too many fish. And what this means is that when fishermen do get to fish, they want to catch all the fish they possibly can, because if they don't, someone else is going to get them. Moreover, it's to their economic advantage to push as hard on the political system as they can to make the limits on fishing as loose as possible. Well, we would like to change those incentives. And one way to do it is to use something called catch shares, in which individual fishermen are assigned a fixed percentage of what's called the total allowable catch for a fishery that's set by government based on various scientific criteria. And these catch shares that fishermen own can be bought and sold and fluctuate in value. They're truly shares. And that means that fishermen have an incentive to maximize the worth of their shares over time. If you let a fishery go down the tubes, the total allowable catch is going to go down and your shares are going to be worth less money. So the idea is to give fishermen an economic incentive to conserve. And these catch share programs have now been extensively used in New Zealand. They're used somewhat in Canada. They're adopted in a couple fisheries in Alaska. And they seem to work pretty well. And we're trying to expand them to more fisheries in the United States. Also working with incentives. We're actively trying to develop organic standards for farmed fish. This is important for a number of reasons. Obviously, organic is the gold standard for many consumers. You know, we talked a lot about problems with organic at this conference, but it's the best label consumers have out there in the marketplace. And so it's really important to have strong organic standards for farmed fish, because they'll act potentially as an incentive for better fish farming practices. On the other hand, on the converse of that, of course, is if we end up with bad organic standards, they'll undermine a lot of efforts that environmental organizations are making otherwise to encourage better production practices, because obviously organic fish would command a premium. And in fact, we already do have organic fish in the market. There are a number of private certifiers abroad that are certifying farmed fish. I live in northern New Jersey, and I can buy them in my supermarket if I want to. And some of these standards have some strengths. Some of them are pretty dubious. I won't go into that. But the upshot is that we really need some strong U.S. Department of Agriculture organic standards for farmed fish, and those are in process. There are a lot of issues that have to be worked through, but I am hopeful that eventually they'll be a very useful marketplace tool. Another way to approach fisheries issues, as I said, particularly because of the international scope of the seafood trade, is to increase consumer demand for environmentally preferable seafood. This is a picture of Environmental Defense's Pocket Seafood Selector, a seafood card. Seafood is incredibly complicated, and it's not reasonable to expect most people to be able to remember all the choices that are good and bad to make. And so wallet cards are a tremendous tool. I know Princeton distributes the Monterey Bay Aquarium's card, which is fantastic. And I urge everyone to carry one of these cards in their pockets. Now, that said, these cards are important, obviously in part because they allow consumers to vote with their pocketbooks. But they're also really important because they cause consumers to start asking questions of the businesses where they buy their fish. And, of course, those sorts of questions are what motivate businesses to offer better choices. After all, we as consumers, for the most part, especially when it comes to fish, can only choose among those products that are offered to us in the marketplace. So with that in mind, a number of organizations, including my own, now have partnerships with selected major seafood purchasers who are beginning to make changes to try and feature more environmentally preferable seafood. We have a partnership I thought I'd highlight with Wegmans supermarkets because it's here in Princeton. But there are other companies that are doing similar things. Ahold, which is a conglomerate that owns Stop and Shop and Giant, is working with the New England Aquarium. Walmart has an ongoing effort, believe it or not. And a number of food service companies, including Bon Appetit, a very progressive food service company in California. Compass Group, the U.S. arm of the world's largest food service company, and actually it's not here, but McDonald's has also made some efforts to source more environmentally fish for its filet of fish sandwich. And I think these efforts are all very important. Obviously, ultimately, our goal is to increase the impact to get some of these pioneering companies to create policies that work in the marketplace, that encourage better fishing and fish farming, and then to get other companies to adopt them too. Well, with that, I thought I would conclude my talk just by spending a moment noting that the issues around seafood have both some important similarities and some important differences with the issues around terrestrial food issues or terrestrial agriculture. And just to note a couple of them, in seafood production, particularly fish farming, we see some of the same trends towards feedlot-style production that we've seen with animal production with pigs and cows and so on. For the most part, aquaculture isn't as far along towards feedlots as terrestrial production, but I cringe every time I go to a scientific meeting and someone talks about the fact that the poultry industry should be the model for the future of seafood production. And believe me, it happens all the time. Another similarity is that it is really critical to educate consumers about the foods they buy. I think there's a lot of commonality between the efforts that are being made with people working on seafood issues and terrestrial food issues, working on sourcing, working on helping consumers make good choices. That said, there are also some very important differences. As I've sort of harped on, one of the important differences is the incredibly international nature of our seafood supply, much more so than our terrestrial food supply. And that makes ideas, for example, about buying local a lot more difficult to execute. Moreover, since so much of our seafood still comes from the oceans, it's very difficult to ask people, say, in Chicago, to necessarily buy local. In addition, as I just said, the majority of our seafood still does come from wild animals. It comes from wild-caught fish, and that means that there are a lot of different sorts of issues about how we manage wild populations of animals that are living in a natural ecosystem that are considerably different than the challenges we face with agricultural policy. So with that, I think I'll stop, and I would love to take some questions after the other presentations.
Thank you very much, Becky. And I might add that copies of the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch card are available or were available outside by the registration desk. And in addition to being useful, these things are an awful lot of fun. On more than one occasion, I've had some flustered chef come out and try to find out who was the person who wanted to know whether the haddock was trawl captured or pole caught. So I recommend them for both environmental, ethical, and entertainment purposes. Our next speaker is Paul Shapiro. Paul Shapiro is the director of the Factory Farming Campaign at the Humane Society of the United States. And as many of you know, the Humane Society is the nation's largest animal welfare organization with nearly 10 million supporters. Paul has spearheaded numerous campaigns to improve the plight of farm animals, and in particular, he has led campaigns to persuade retailers to stop selling battery cage eggs. In addition, Mr. Shapiro has worked as a farm animal cruelty investigator, documenting conditions on egg and broiler factory farms, at livestock auctions, and at slaughter plants. It's a pleasure to welcome him here. He will be talking about farm animal welfare concerns and progress in the United States.
Thank you very much, David. And I understand that you're giving me all of Gidon's time, too, so I have 40 minutes now? Right, okay, good. Well, thanks so much for coming out. Thanks to the organizers for bringing us all here together. It's been an excellent conference so far, and for the next 20 minutes, it's going to get a lot better. No, just kidding. As you heard, my name is Paul Shapiro, and I work for the Humane Society of the United States. And many of you, when you think about the Humane Society, you may think about the work that we do for dogs and cats, and you may think about the programs that we run, free spaying, neutering programs, free veterinary care for animals in impoverished communities, maybe the emergency disaster work that we did in Hurricane Katrina. But we're also concerned not only about dogs and cats, we're also concerned about farm animals. And thank you. Farm animals, like dogs and cats, are individuals who care about their lives. They can suffer, and they have individual personalities. And we figure if German Shepherds can get along with farm animals, then maybe we should be able to as well. So the problem, of course, is that even though farm animals are capable of suffering, on factory farms, they suffer immensely. Now, the title of this talk is Concerns and Progress, and so I want to go over a few of the most serious concerns that animal welfare advocates have about the factory farming of animals, especially cattle, pigs, and chickens. So you've got a situation where the majority of breeding pigs in the United States, the female breeding pigs, are confined in 2-foot-wide cages known as gestation crates that prevent them even from turning around, let alone engaging in other important natural behaviors. And this is not a temporary holding cage for these pigs. This is where they spend their entire lives. Similarly, calves who are raised for veal, the majority of them in our country, spend their entire lives chained by their necks inside of similarly restrictive crates in which they can barely move for months on end. It is truly unimaginable to try to imagine what these animals' lives must be like. At the same time, we kill, as we heard yesterday from Professor Singer, about 9 billion, that's billion with a B, we kill about 9 billion chickens in the United States for human consumption each year. It's about more than 1 million an hour. And nearly all of them are subjected to a method of slaughter known as electric stunning. Now, keep in mind that electric stunning merely stuns these animals into paralysis, not unconsciousness. So the animals are shackled by their feet upside down. They are moved through a pool of water that is electrified, paralyzed, and then run over an electric blade which cuts their throats. And a small percentage of them end up missing that blade, and the next step in the process is for them to drown in a tank of scalding water that's designed to loosen their feathers. But even a smaller percentage amounts to millions of animals per year. You can imagine the outcry there would be if millions of dogs and cats each year were being killed by drowning them in tanks of scalding water. And then perhaps the most intensive form of confinement on factory farms is the cruelty to which egg-laying hens are subjected. About 95% of the egg-laying hens in our country are confined in what are known as battery cages. These are cages that give each bird less space than a sheet of letter-sized paper on which to live for her entire life. So for 18 months, these birds are confined in cages that are so restrictive they're unable even to spread their wings, let alone engage in numerous other important behaviors such as nesting, dust bathing, perching, and so on. Now, some of you may be thinking, how can all of this cruelty be permissible? Don't we have laws against animal cruelty? Well, at the federal level, we have very little. The Animal Welfare Act exempts all animals raised for food. The Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, as poorly enforced as it is, exempts about 95% of animals who are slaughtered in our country. And at the farm level, on the farm as opposed to at slaughter, there's no federal regulation whatsoever. There are no federal standards for how animals can be raised. And at the state level, while it's true that each state does have a cruelty code, the majority of states in our country exempt what they call common farming practices, no matter how abusive they may be. So if a practice is common yet abusive, in most states in our country, it's exempt from the cruelty statutes. So these animals, for the most part, animals who are raised for food, are living in a virtual legal vacuum with almost no protection from cruelty. Now, thinking about this and realizing how abused these animals are, you may be feeling the way that I do. And I think it's reasonable to feel that way. Nobody likes to see animals abused. Nobody likes to lose either, apparently. But the good news is that we are making progress. I think for the first time in many years, we're starting to see serious progress. So this is Chipotle's website. Anybody here eat at Chipotle? Too few hands are going up. Do they not have it in New Jersey? It's actually really good. But and it's used to be owned by McDonald's. But anyway, this is their website. Quite frankly, factory farms suck, and Chipotle uses Niman Ranch pork, and some of their chicken is antibiotic-free. And it's not idyllic conditions, but the animals overall have better lives than the animals who are served at many other fast food chains. Also, on the crate issue, you've got the entire European Union now has banned both veal crates and gestation crates. The state of Florida, by ballot initiative, in a landslide vote in 2002, banned the confinement of breeding pigs in gestation crates. Temple Grandin, who's on the McDonald's Animal Welfare Advisory Committee and who's renowned for being an expert in livestock handling, has said, quote, that gestation crates for pigs are a real problem. Basically, you're asking a sow to live in an airline seat. I think it's something that needs to be phased out. At the same time, the most recent advance that we've seen against the confinement of veal calves and breeding pigs in gestation crates is the topic that many of you have been hearing about earlier today and yesterday, and that is Arizona. Just last week, voters in Arizona, by a huge landslide, by a 24-point margin, passed a ballot measure, Prop 204, which prohibits the confinement of calves and breeding pigs in crates that are too narrow for them to turn around and extend their limbs. Seems kind of crazy that we even have to be having that debate in our society today, but unfortunately, since most veal calves and breeding pigs are confined in that manner, we are waging that battle. And despite the fact that the agribusiness interests put in well over $2 million to fight us in this campaign in Arizona, which is far more money than what we in the animal welfare community put into it, the voters spoke loud and clear. And they sent a message to the factory farming community, both in Arizona and across the nation, that its practices are out of step with the moral sensibilities of our society, that farm animals deserve better, and that the time for change is now. So that is an extremely important victory that I think all of us ought to be celebrating, and hopefully we'll see more victories to come. Now, moving on to progress on poultry slaughter, we've seen less progress, but still some progress. MBA Poultry, which is a Nebraska poultry slaughterer, has implemented one of the first controlled atmosphere killing slaughter plants in the United States. Controlled atmosphere killing is a slaughter method that is more widely used in Europe than it is here, but it involves rendering the birds unconscious or dead before they are even ever shackled. There are obvious animal welfare benefits to this method. There are also worker safety benefits as well. So MBA Poultry, in a press release in Nebraska, they put out a press release last year saying that there have been numerous studies conducted that lead us to believe the typical electric stunning systems used in the U.S. can cause severe welfare problems for millions and possibly billions of birds each year. This is coming from a poultry slaughter company, not from an animal welfare charity. So there is increasing recognition that the conventional method of killing birds causes extreme and unnecessary suffering that can be avoided by switching over to systems that are better for the welfare of the birds. They may not be perfect, they may not be ideal, and the question of whether animals ought to be slaughtered for food anyway is a matter that's still up for debate. But as long as chickens are being killed for food, really we owe it to them at a bare minimum to avoid some of the most cruel and inhumane slaughter practices, and that can be done through controlled atmosphere killing. Dr. Bruce Webster at the University of Georgia, a poultry scientist, stated that the current dumping, shackling, electric stunning process is a dinosaur. Hopefully the rest of the industry and some of the fast food companies will start demanding that this dinosaur go extinct. And then finally, of course, Temple granted again, the U.S. poultry industry should move toward controlled atmosphere stunning. Another advance in the poultry slaughter issue is a lawsuit that the Humane Society of the United States has brought against the Department of Agriculture for failing to cover poultry under the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. Here's an article in the San Francisco Chronicle, Poultry Slaughter Suit Okayed. That means that essentially the issues of standing have been resolved in this lawsuit and that the case is now moving on to the merits. Anybody interested in hearing more about that can come up and we'll talk more afterwards about it. Now, the biggest area of progress that I think that I've seen as far as farm animal welfare is concerned is on the battery cage issue, and that is, quite frankly, because it is the most intensive form of confinement. Many animal welfare groups are putting serious attention on getting birds out of battery cages. Now, it really has been like a tidal wave of progress in the last few years. The choice for many companies is not whether or not to sell eggs, which is a matter that's still up for debate, but the choice for many companies is whether or not to sell eggs that come from birds who are confined in battery cages like this, or that come from cage-free egg farms like this farm here. You can see that cage-free egg farms may not be ideal, but they are significantly better than battery cage farms. The birds are able to walk around, to spread their wings, lay their eggs in nests, and so on. And so what we've seen is a number of companies switching over to cage-free eggs. Whole Foods in 2005 adopted a policy to only sell cage-free eggs. A decade ago, you saw many grocery chains bragging that they offered cage-free eggs. Now you see grocery chains bragging that they don't offer battery cage eggs. Wild Oats Natural Marketplace, their main competitor, announced in 2005 that it adopted an exclusively battery cage egg-free policy for all of its stores. Trader Joe's in 2005 announced that it was adopting a policy where all Trader Joe's brand eggs would be converted to cage-free. Even Ben & Jerry's, just a few months ago, declared that it was converting all of the nearly 100 million eggs that it uses in its ice cream every year to cage-free. Now, many people may think, wow, well, one, Ben & Jerry's uses eggs. That's news to many people. But two, this is a company that brags about its opposition to factory farming, and it's a very socially responsible company. How can they be using tens and tens of millions of battery eggs each year? Well, they're phasing it out, and that's a huge step in the right direction that I think deserves to be applauded. You can see on the homepage there, excellent news. There's no shortage of puns that you can use in the, it's stupendous. It's, anyway. So not only are we seeing major retailers like Whole Foods, Wild Oats, Ben & Jerry's all getting rid of battery cage eggs, but even major corporations like AOL and Google are refusing to serve their employees battery cage eggs. The San Jose Mercury News front page screamed that Google uses clout to free hens when Google announced that it was adopting an exclusively cage-free egg policy. The Washington Post read, AOL bans eggs from caged hens. The trend is becoming increasingly clear that no socially responsible company wants to have anything to do with battery cage eggs, and in the same way that many people can't hear the word veal without conjuring up images of animal cruelty, and rightly so, many people are now recognizing that battery cage eggs are becoming the new veal. Again, no socially responsible company wants to have its image tarnished by using or selling or serving these eggs that come from birds who are so horribly abused. Bon Appetit, as you mentioned, about sustainable seafood policies, also adopted an exclusively cage-free shell egg policy. We're seeing other companies, too, doing the same, and it really is just like a tidal wave. Nearly 100 universities are now using cage-free eggs, whereas a few years ago it was 0. Princeton, I'm proud to say, while I can't count myself as one of the alumni, is on the list of schools that are now using cage-free eggs. I think Stu can correct me if I'm wrong. I think they're using shell eggs, not liquid eggs. So the shell eggs that are in Princeton are cage-free, whereas the liquid eggs are from battery hens. So there's a lot of progress on the university front as well, and just in the way that we've seen many other social movements really gaining traction on campuses in our country, we're seeing farm animal welfare do just the same. We're also seeing city governments getting into the act. Here's a recent Washington Post article from a few weeks ago. The city of Tacoma Park, Maryland, their city council passed a unanimous resolution condemning the confinement of laying hens in battery cages and urging residents of the city not to buy battery cage eggs. I think this is a truly historic moment. Even though it's a non-binding resolution, still for a city government to come down and weigh in on an issue is a pretty big deal in my opinion. The Wall Street Journal last year had a front-page personal journal story. Said, "The yoke of oppression," another great pun. Eggs are latest front in humane food wars. And that's what's happening. Eggs are becoming the latest front in the humane food wars for sure. Now, there's also progress not only in the treatment of animals and in corporate social responsibility, but also in advertising. We saw the egg industry was concerned that many people were starting to realize just how abusively most laying hens are treated, and so they slapped a label on their cartons that read "Animal Care Certified." Well, as Marion can tell us all, advertising can often be misleading, and so we took them to the Better Business Bureau, and we said, this is clearly false advertising. These birds are confined in cages that are so restrictive they can't even spread their wings for their entire lives. How can this be animal care certified? The Better Business Bureau agreed with us and ruled that indeed it was misleading. The egg industry had some egg on its face, and so they appealed the ruling to what's essentially the Supreme Court of the Better Business Bureau. It's called the National Advertising Review Board. And the National Advertising Review Board of the BBB the next year upheld the ruling and said, yes, we agree with the earlier ruling that this is misleading and that it ought to change. The egg industry still did not want to change, and so it took a lawsuit filing and then finally the Federal Trade Commission stepping in, and the egg industry announced voluntarily, of course, last year that it was pulling the Animal Care Certified logo from egg cartons nationwide and replacing it with a less misleading logo that simply reads United Egg Producers Certified. Of course, the United Egg Producers has created their own voluntary program that permits battery cage confinement and other abuses, and now these eggs are United Egg Producers Certified. Still, that didn't get them out of the Animal Care Certified hot bath, so to speak, and 16 state attorney generals, along with the D.C. Attorney General, just last month settled a case with the United Egg Producers for a $100,000 fine for engaging in what they alleged was false advertising related to the Animal Care Certified scam. So there has been progress, I think, on the welfare labeling issue. There still are misleading labels out there for sure, but I think that the whole Animal Care Certified case really demonstrates that you can't just slap a label on no matter how horrible the conditions are and claim that it's good welfare, that there are going to be serious challenges to that. And I think that's good. You know, there's definitely progress being made. We're not as far as we hope to go, but progress is being made. Now, all of these corporate policies that are being changed, the AOLs, the Googles, the Whole Foods, and otherwise, are not just policies in and of themselves that don't affect how animals are actually being raised. Here's an article from last April in the Portland Press-Herald. It says, Radlow Foods spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to rip out wire cages that once housed more than 80,000 birds. It's the first large-scale conversion of a conventional hen house in Maine and perhaps the country. In order to meet the demand for improved farm animal welfare, battery cage egg producers are literally ripping out the cages from their foundation to make way for cage-free hens. In a shed that used to hold 80,000 birds, now 20,000 birds are held. Is that ideal? Of course not. Is it significantly better? Absolutely. And so these companies like Bon Appetit and Whole Foods and AOL and Google really are having a dramatic impact on the way that animals are being raised in a way that little else actually could. I think probably more than some of the legislative efforts, although those are extremely important as well. So we're seeing a massive change in the way that animals, relative to a few years ago, a massive change in the way animals are being raised, and I think this spells good news on the horizon. However, we can't ignore the fact that the overwhelming majority of egg-laying hens, of veal calves, of breeding pigs are still confined in cages and crates that are so abusive that they're prohibited in many other countries, and that the overwhelming majority of the American public finds simply unacceptable. Poll after poll shows that people don't think it's appropriate to confine animals in spaces for long periods of time in which they can't even move. And so while there may be some light at the end of the tunnel here, I think it's important not to overstate what's happening. I think it's also important that we're seeing a proliferation of vegetarian foods in the marketplace so that people can choose vegetarian options as opposed to animal options. And I know that Marion was talking about the need to eat more fruits and vegetables. Michael Jacobson from Center for the Science and Public Interest is talking about the need to switch to a more plant-based diet for both animal welfare and environmental reasons, and I couldn't agree more. But while there is still a major problem, I really do think that we're living in exciting times. Right now, I firmly believe that we are living in a truly historic moment in that the intensification of animal agriculture has only gotten worse and worse and worse over the last several decades. And for the first time in our country, we're seeing a slow start to the de-intensification, which is good for a number of reasons. And I have no doubt that when historians look back in the time after battery cages and gestation crates and veal crates have been banned, that they're going to be looking back on these first few years of the 21st century and recognize that they were the formative moments in a movement, in a nationwide movement, to really address a fundamental wrong that has been increasing in severity over the course of all of our lifetimes here in this room. And I'm proud to be a part of that change, and I hope that that everyone else in this room is proud to be a part of it as well. I think by the fact that you're here, you are definitely part of it. And I would encourage you to talk with people like myself and other speakers as to how you can get more involved, because there really is no shortage of ways that we can act to help these animals. Animals on factory farms can't defend themselves. They're completely at our mercy, and they're counting on us to defend them, and I know that we won't let them down. So thanks so much for coming out, and we'll talk more later.
Our third speaker in this session is Gidon Eshel. Gidon is a professor of physical oceanography and climate in the Department of Geophysical Sciences at the University of Chicago. One of his main research interests is to compare the energy consumption of animal and plant-based diets, and more broadly, to explore the range of ecological footprints that are generated by different dietary choices. It's a pleasure to have him here.
Thank you. It's likewise a pleasure for me and Pam to be here. And I think we come to it from two distinct points of view. One is that we're, as far as I can tell, the only physical scientists in the list, distinguished list of speakers. So we bring an angle that is somewhat different, I think. The other thing is that, in the name of full disclosure, I will say that after I was in the Israeli military for many years, I actually ran a beef cattle farm for a number of years. And that, I think, sets me apart from most academics. And Pam likewise grew up in a small Midwestern town where the largest structure was the grain elevator. So I think we do bring a different perspective, which I hope to outline in the next 20 minutes or so. Okay, so this is almost an axiomatic statement that everybody around here at least believes. The physical environment, the one that we need really in order to produce food, is heavily taxed, and a large portion of that is exerted by animal, which has energetic and other consequences. For example, here's the biggest, the main grain, right? Here you see a pie chart, and here is your corn at about a little over 30% of everything that we grow. And here are the uses of that product, and you see that towering over everything else to the tune of 61% of the total is feed. Okay, so we devote a lot of resources to feed the animals that we saw in various talks, treated in various inhumane ways. So we're going to outline various ideas very briefly about how this system is taxed and what are some of the consequences of that. Okay, so the first one that I want to talk about here is land use, and here are examples of subdivisions, as they call them in America, sort of encroaching on otherwise fertile, productive land. So here we plot the cropland. Okay, in the U.S., this is cropland, rangeland, total rural, and pasture as a function of time, which is the horizontal axis. And you see that all of them, any category that you care to look at, exhibits a declining trend. Okay, and that's exactly because of this. Okay, not only, but to some extent. Okay, and cropland, which is where the portion of the land mostly allocated to growing corn, is that much, 17.7 was at 82, and now it's whatever is that. It's like upward of 10%. Okay. Now over in the upper panel, we see that we proliferate and fill the earth, so this is the population again as a function of time. This is in the U.S. Okay, male, female, and then here the total. So you would think, naively, that we have here the two ingredients necessary for a Malthusian crisis. We have declining resource and increased demand. Okay? Now, that in and of itself will lead you to say, well, there's clearly a crisis in land use in the making. We don't actually claim that, and we make a very clear distinction between ourselves and this man over here. Does anybody recognize him? Yeah, Paul Ehrlich, all right. I tell you, I was a faculty candidate at Stanford, and my candidacy ended after I spoke with Paul Ehrlich because I told him that I really care deeply about the predictions I make, and in particular, I like the correlation between them and what actually unfolds to be positive. So we're not making such claims, but there's clearly an issue here. Okay, here is sort of a spatial statement of the problem. This is percent of land area used for crops, and you see that in the areas where the confluence of all geophysical parameters that matter for grain production, the confluence of all of those actually results in most of the land being used. This upper color, which is clearly characteristic of our state of Illinois, is upward of 40%. And over here, you see county by county the acres of corn harvested in 2002 for grain as percent of the total harvest. And you see over here 50 or more percent. So clearly that statement is borne out by the data. The finest land in this country is sacrificed for feed production. So that's point number one. The dietary choices that we make have geophysical consequences. You can see that, for example, if you are a camera mounted on a satellite looking down on the U.S. from space, You will clearly see that in terms of the radiative properties of the continental US. We have actually, by our dietary choices, altered the radiative properties of the surface area of the US in a discernible, measurable way. Another thing that we altered in a dramatic way is biogeochemical cycles, especially of the macronutrients. What is shown here, over here is the annual rate of nitrogen fixation in 10 to the 9th kilograms per year. Now, for those of you who don't know what nitrogen fixation is, I mean, nitrogen is not broken, no need to worry. It's just that in the atmosphere you have nitrogen as molecular nitrogen, one atom, another atom, and they share some electrons. This partnership is a very, very strong one, and therefore the N2 molecule is largely biologically inert and not available for biological functions. We need to convert, or one needs to convert that nitrogen into biologically active forms, and that's what nitrogen fixation essentially is. The point of this is these land and oceans, this is the natural rate of nitrogen fixation globally. This is the rate at which agriculture and industry fix nitrogen. We have one atmosphere to deal with, that's it. We're not going to have another one. And we have here our rate of nitrogen fixing towering over that which occurs naturally. Here is a different view of that. Here are various ways we either directly or indirectly enhance nitrogen fixation. This, between the two dashed lines, is the rate, the estimated rate of nitrogen fixation over land and ocean combined. And you see that the totality of our uses exceeded the low estimate in 1971, and in 88 or so we've exceeded the upper estimate. So now we know for a fact, and that's consistent. That's consistent with this, that our uses tower over naturally occurring nitrogen fixation. That again gives you a pause, or at least it should give you a pause. You know, we are engaging in a massively large-scale planetary engineering, really. But we are not engineers, really, or not particularly good ones. Here is an example of, okay, so you do all this nitrogen fixation. How about at least use it in a prudent fashion? This shows that this is not the case. What is shown here, this whole panel deals with a number of basins in the Mississippi catchment, okay? So each dot corresponds to a sub-basin, okay? And what's shown here is the percent of that basin that is occupied by row crops, mostly the soil and the corn and soy rotation, or corn on corn lack of rotation sometimes, okay? And here is the mean nitrate concentration in water that's collected from those catchments. And you see a very nice correlation with some scatter, obviously, but the point of it is the more intense your agricultural occupation of the land is, the more nitrogen leaching there is. Nitrogen leaching is that which you would like to bring to zero, because it is something that some form of nitrogen, 100% of which goes to create adverse effect, and 0% of it goes to producing food. Okay? Here is a curve showing here is the yield right here, and that's shown right in this vertical axis, and this is the application rate of nitrogen fertilizer. This is that rate which will give you the maximum yield. The current in the U.S. is about 125, but so it seems like we're doing pretty good. We are very close to the maximum yield with minimizing the adverse effect. This dashed curve shows you leachable nitrogen. However, take note of this. Okay, this number is inching upward, and here you see it here's the developing countries, for example. The legend is shown here, 5960, 8990, and projected use for 2020. And you see in all of the regions, including the world as a whole, there's an upward trend. Okay? Here's our Mississippi basin, where most of our corn and soy to feed animals come from. And what is shown here, this is the inputs and the outputs in terms of nitrogen. And this is the residual, and notice that they have different scales. This is the scale for the residual. This is the scale for inputs and outputs. And now, over here, the mouth of the Mississippi, right where New Orleans used to be, there is a huge flux of nitrogen dissolved in the discharge of the Mississippi into the Gulf of Mexico. And here is the residual a time series plotted against time, the residual from here. So in other words, how much excess nitrogen is inputted into the basin. And here is the flux of nitrogen into the Gulf. And the point is that after some honeymoon period where the land was relatively unsaturated with respect to nitrogen and could absorb the assault that we bombarded it with, after that honeymoon period was over, and basically you needed a balance where whatever residual there is has to go out by means of surface runoff, then the residual and the flux into the Gulf are exactly mirror images of each other. So the upshot of it is we are doing too much fertilizing, we're doing it inefficiently, and we thereby increase the nutrient load in the Gulf of Mexico. Now that is, I'll actually get to the consequences of that in a minute, but here is a plot of the proportion of excess nitrogen that's exported out, and phosphorus. So these two are for nitrogen, these two are for phosphorus, and this is the proportion that that fertilizer application is responsible for, and this is directly through animal agriculture. Okay, and you see, right? I mean, in many of the prime parts of the Mississippi catchment, or really the U.S. east of the Rockies, you see that you have that category of the red, which is 50 to 100%. So we are fertilizing in a very inefficient way, well, there's no efficient way of conducting animal agriculture, but this simply tells you what the effluent rate is, and it is staggering. Okay, some of that discharge of excess nutrients into the world ocean results in what we call dead zones, which are all over the coastal waters in the world. This is a picture of the Gulf of Mexico. Here's an oil rig right there, and this is a picture of the front separating Mississippi discharge here. So north is this way. Mississippi discharge here, and clear blue Gulf of Mexico waters. Here, the front is extremely sharp because it migrates back and forth semi-diurnally with the tide. The point is that you have a situation where you can readily see from space, either in the visible band or in a false color band that is explicitly designed to capture biological particles, and this is what we see here, a huge proliferation of algae, which basically is the result of that discharge of nutrients, which is largely unnecessary. Okay, this is the size of the dead zone in one particular year. This is a time series of the size of the dead zone. This red horizontal bar is the fine state of Rhode Island that sent Lincoln Chafee home just the other day. So This is the mechanism by which dead zones occur. Basically, the ocean is a stratified fluid. In other words, you have light fluid up top, dense fluid below. The reason this is light is primarily twofold. It's warmer because it absorbs solar radiation, and it is less salty. Now you bring in, here's the mouth of the Mississippi, and you bring in water that's not only extremely fresh, but also very high in nutrients, okay? Then you have, you have this bounty of nutrients, you have nice sunshine coming down, you have biological productivity. That when it sinks down, all those particles of algae that sink down, they decompose, they consume all the oxygen, and all the bottom dwellers here are basically deprived of oxygen, and they either go south or go really south. One issue that, another issue that matters a great deal, that actually is a picture of the Ogallala aquifer that was mentioned earlier. This is the mean situation, the thickness, essentially, in feet. This is shown right here, from the bottom to the top of the aquifer, the saturated region, and this is what it was like in 96-7, and this is the difference right here from 80 to 97. In many, I know it's hard to read the legend, in many places, the difference is actually 10 or more % drop in the availability of readily harvested fresh water. This is not a sustainable way to run your freshwater budget, and a lot of it goes to producing corn and soy that at least some of, a large portion of, goes to feeding animals. Part of the issue is changing the surface properties. I alluded earlier to the radiative properties, but one thing, without getting too much into the numbers here because time is running short, the point here is shown schematically right here. When you use the land very intensely, you alter its hydrological properties. And this is something called a hydrograph, which is basically, if you were to take a given river and measure how much water goes through it from some time zero that is the rain event, you in the old days or in an unaltered catchment these days, you see something like that: nice, slow, and subdued rise, and then slow decline. Okay. Conversely, when most of the surface area in the catchment is devoted to row crops, you get a huge peak, much higher than previously, enhancing erosion, and then a rapid decline. That means that this water, even though the area, the integral here is the same, the area under the two curves is the same, this water has much less chance to work its way, percolate down, and do its thing, and replenish the aquifer underneath. This water is much more likely, because it is so spiky, to simply be washed off into the ocean and be lost. Okay? This is a demonstration. This is the total, the blue, okay? And this is as a function of time, the consumptive use of water, okay? And this is the total, and this is for irrigation. And the point of this plot is to show you how close these are, okay? In other words, irrigation amounts to, it maybe is an obvious thing, but it's worth pointing out numerically that irrigation, again, primarily to producing corn that absolutely nobody needs, is a huge consumer of available water. Okay, now our claim to fame, right? And that is greenhouse gas emissions, okay? When you produce food, you produce greenhouse, you are responsible for the emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. I assume that everybody knows what greenhouse gases are. If not, you should take one of my classes. But the point is that a large chunk of the greenhouse gases associated with food production is indeed energy production, fossil fuel combustion, that's 2.5 essentially tons of CO2 equivalent per person per year in the US. Okay? Now, there are two or three actually trailing ones that are smaller by a good chunk, but nonetheless very important. Enteric fermentation is an easy one. That's what happens when organic matter decomposes anaerobically inside rumens of ruminants, primarily cows, and they produce methane. This fermentation produces methane, which actually, contrary to popular belief, comes out through the front end. It's burping, and that is responsible for 0.4 ton per person per year of CO2 equivalent. That's not a trivial thing. Agricultural land management, obviously, when you plow, till, whatever the land, you alter in a dramatic way its composition and its physical attributes, and that changes the rate at which it exchanges gases with the atmosphere, etc. And the total consequence of that is about a ton of CO2 equivalent per person per year. And then there's waste management, that's manure mostly, and rice, especially the way it's practiced in Southeast Asia. Okay, now, it's really important to remember this. This is the energetic efficiency of various foods. In red are animal-based foods, in green, plant-based foods, okay? The point of this is that you get about 1/10 of what you put in terms of fossil fuel energy from animals. You get somewhere between 200 and even 500. We chose to leave out oats, because oats is 510. It would have blown the curve, okay? So we don't want to do that. But you get the picture. Here, you get 2 to 5 times more energy, edible energy, than you put in from Saudi Arabia. Here, you get 1/10. That's the big difference, okay? Now, I don't want to get too not technical. I mean, there's nothing here that any certified accountant cannot do. However, or even an uncertified one, for all I know. But I want to get to the punchline, so let's skip that unless there will be questions. Okay. What is shown here is over here in the horizontal axis is the percent of caloric input from animal sources. So, for example, the mean American diet, conveniently acronymed MAD, has about a third of the calories from animal sources. Okay, right there. Okay, the various lines, the various curves. And their slopes correspond to various semi-realistic hypothetical diets. For example, here's the mean American diet. So the slope of the line is determined by the composition of the diet. What is in it? How much of your calories come from egg, from dairy, from meat, red meat, poultry, etc. Okay? So here is, for example, the least offensive diet, except for vegan, of course, which is where you get all of that portion. Let me just show you here. That portion of your assorted meat portion of the calories. This is just simply taken from the FAO data, and that's Marion Nessel alluded earlier to the figure of 3774 kilocalories per person per day in the US. That's what the total here, right here. And this is the portion that's derived from animals, and this in particular is the part from meat. So if all of that portion is from poultry, and you consume, again, that many, let's say 30% of your calories from animal sources, in that case it will be 30% of your calories from poultry, you are responsible for the extra emission of about a ton, extra ton, above and beyond what your fellow vegan person is responsible for, even though you both eat the same amount of vastly excessive amount of calories. Okay? So you see right here that if you are eating not only the fraction of your calories from animal sources the way most Americans do, but also the composition of those 30% is partitioned among the various sources to reflect the mean American diet, then you're responsible for the excess emission of 1.5 tons of CO2 equivalent. Now, to put that in perspective for you, each one of us is responsible, I put myself among the Americans, is responsible for somewhere between 18 and 22 tons of CO2 equivalent per year, just by virtue of existing. Okay, so that number, 1.5 tons. Oh, I should say that of that 18 to 22, about 4 tons, roughly speaking, is the dietary component. Okay, so if you can change your planetary footprint, specifically in terms of global warming effect by releasing greenhouse gases, by 1.5 over 4, okay, over 4 because that's the total that's contributed, roughly speaking, by diet, then you see that you're talking a huge and very significant, discernible, important portion of your total planetary footprint is at your very fingertips. You just don't have to eat as much food from animal sources. That's it. And now, it's important to emphasize that we don't advocate anything. I really admire Peter Singer for being an ethicist, because I'm sheepish about telling people what's ethical and what's not. You know, it takes guts to do that. But what we are saying, Pam and I, is that whatever you can do to inch yourself a little bit from wherever you are along this along the horizontal axis, whatever you can do to inch yourself a little bit toward the origin, more power to you. You are a better person for it. It's interesting to see that we all care a great deal about the car that we drive, and we spare no expense to buy a Prius, right? And we will travel halfway across the globe simply to buy a Prius, and that's very virtuous, and we, deserve a pat on the back. However, it is important to notice that, for example, if you are a red meat aficionado and you eat 34 or 35% of your calories from that source, the added emissions of greenhouse gases you're responsible for, on top of what your fellow veganese is responsible for, that is 2.5 tons, and that is very much identical to the difference between driving an SUV to driving a Camry. Okay? So it's a big and important difference. So, food production exerts a major pressure on the physical environment, both in the US and globally, affecting just about anything, but just to give some examples, the hydrological cycle, completely altered over the US, available land use, most biogeochemical cycles, we only showed 2, but most of them are altered, the atmospheric radiative properties, that's global warming for you, and by their inherent inefficient use of finite resources, animal-based foods tax the global environment disproportionately, and therefore it is meritorious that we will try to minimize them in our diet. Thank you very much.
If the panelists will take a seat up here, we will take questions for really no more than 5 minutes to try to keep this on schedule. So I would ask that both the questions, especially the questions, and to a lesser degree the answers, be short. Woman down there with her hands up. Can we get a microphone to her?
Hi, I wonder if all of you could address the issue of proponents of industrial agriculture will say that a growing population needs industrial agriculture in order to feed the population that we have. From all of your perspectives, could you address that?
Sure, I'll give it at least a quick attempt and give everybody a chance. It's not that simple. I mean, people tend to talk to critics of current agricultural practices and say, you throw us back to the Stone Age or at least to turn-of-the-century farming practices which don't have very high yields and so on. And the fact is that the way we need to move forward is to look for better agricultural practices. We shouldn't reject technology, but we need to look hard at how those practices are adopted and how they're used and pick the best and throw out the worst. So when people raise issues like that, they're raising a false dichotomy.
I actually see I agree to some extent, but I also disagree a little bit in the sense that there is an issue here. And one thing, I mean, even though this conference was wonderful, or is wonderful, one thing that was really missing is the class issue. That, many people can't afford many of the, at least in the current system, many of the solutions that we advocate. Obviously, we are all sympathetic, and all the speakers before were sympathetic to that, so that's fine. But there is a class issue here, and I disagree with Marion Nessel when she says you can always eat healthy in any supermarket in this country. That is blatantly false. Pam and I run field courses. We take kids all over the country, and we have a really hard time. Even 30 miles south of D.C. was the last time. We just couldn't find anything to buy. It is true that industrial agriculture has something to offer that we can't currently do away with. That is correct. We need to, among the many, many things that we need to do, we need to make sure that whatever advantages are put in place are distributed evenly and justly. That's.
Just very briefly, most of the poor people in the world subsist on a much more plant-based diet than the affluent nations do. Many plant-based options are far cheaper. Maybe if you go to Chipotle, the vegetarian burrito is $1 cheaper. Many Chinese restaurants, the plant-based options are cheaper. So it is definitely, to take your advice of eating fewer animal products can oftentimes be cheaper than buying a diet that is heavy in animal products.
Gentleman in the front.
For Dr. Goldburg, recently I read, which I guess everybody here did, about the massive decline of commercially viable fish. And I looked at the plot myself and saw this trend going down. I guess it could occur probably even earlier. But could you comment on that?
Sure. Those results are by from a recent article in Science magazine, which actually has much more to it than just that one plot. And the projections show that if we keep current rates of fishing, we'll see basically about zero commercially viable fish populations by, I believe it's 2048. And one can argue whether that projection is exactly correct or not. But it's just a mirror of the fishing down the food chain slide I showed you, that people are scooping out of the ocean almost as fast as we can all the big commercially valuable fish. And it's an incredibly distressing state of affairs, and it manages to happen in part because most of us never venture under the ocean, especially to areas that aren't spectacular coral reefs where we like to snorkel, and so things are allowed to happen that we would never allow on land.
One more question. Person in red over here. Let me repeat the question for those who did not hear it. The gentleman inquired about any progress that is being made with respect to improvements in beef packing plants and slaughterhouses. Paul?
People like Temple Grandin claim there is being progress made at the initiative of some of the retailers who are doing audits. Other people question question how much progress is being made. The GAO issued a report stating that many animals were just simply being killed in violation of the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act recently, and so there are very serious concerns. I think it's also important to recognize that we slaughter about 35 million cattle in this country every year, yet we slaughter more than 9 billion chickens every year. And so from an animal welfare perspective, there is a much greater sense of urgency on improving the welfare of birds as opposed to cattle. Not that cattle aren't important, that their suffering doesn't matter, of course, it does, and many of them are subjected to truly horrific abuse. But the reason why so many animal welfare groups are focusing on the plight of birds is simply because of the universe of suffering is so much greater in that realm.
And we will take one more question. The woman in the back with the red scarf.
I have a question for Dr. Eshel. In the last graph that you showed with the energy use and the greenhouse gases associated with eating different diets, it strikes me that well, all cows are not created equal, that some cows are raised on grass and some are raised on corn, and that those two cows will have very different greenhouse gas emissions and fuel associated with them. So I was wondering if you could address that.
It's a great question, and it's based on a correct premise. So there are two parts, if you recall, to the greenhouse gas footprint. The first is CO2 combusted for energy use, and I mean, if a cow is just grazing throughout her life, let's say it's a she, on the range, then she consumes none of that. But most of them are what they call finished in feedlots. The composition of their burps is rather different depending on their diet, and so they're walking greenhouse gas producers, and that matters a great deal. And it is true that there's much more roughage in grazing, and therefore there's much more methane production. Pam and I talked about it, didn't do that calculation, so I wouldn't venture numbers here, but it is possible that it totally undoes the advantage presented by CO2 savings. So that the excess methane actually undoes what saving CO2 does.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, to keep on schedule, I'm going to have to bring an end to the questions, although I think there will be opportunities to meet with the speakers. At this point, we will begin adjourning for lunch. We will report back at 2:15. Students in Environmental Studies 201 who've registered for the lunch, there will be 2 tables reserved for you. I want to take this moment to thank very much Rebecca, Gidon, and Paul.